Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. The Knicks are back for the 2024-25 Media Day. The biggest storylines. Did we learn anything? Find out next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. I want to remind you, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today. And every day we want to remind you to tune in on YouTube on a daily basis. If you want to become an everydayer, be sure to subscribe. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss an episode there. And then be sure to do the same on your favorite podcast platform of choice. I am Gavin, Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. He is Alex Wolfe, editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrick.land. And we are officially taking off for the 24-25 season. We can't talk about one of the most important players for the 24-25 season, at least directly. Karl-Anthony Towns was at the facility this morning per a couple of different reporters. Unfortunately, the Knicks were shadow banned from directly mentioning him. There were some allusions to him. There were some allusions to the impact he could potentially make. All in all, a media day that was largely uneventful, but did have some important revelations. Jalen Brunson, all clear for training camp. OG Anunoby, also fully healthy. Mitchell Robinson, according to Tom Thibodeau, no real time frame on his injury, other than they want to make sure he's completely healthy before moving forward, and that they intend to be patient. So I guess, Alex, good news that nothing super eventful out of this media day.
Yeah, good and bad. I mean, it was just kind of boring. I don't know. I feel like media day is usually more fun than this. I don't know. It just kind of, it felt, and I mean, look, hey, that's part of rooting for a team with good continuity and all that. I mean, obviously, two extremely big new faces, one of which we did not get to see today. But, these guys, for the most part, know each other. Jalen Brunson is the most media trained superstar maybe in the league, maybe that the Knicks have ever had. He's just, I mean, he had it right down. It was like a presidential candidate up there that had confidential information that he knew he wasn't allowed to reveal with the KAT thing. He immediately they were like, so what do you think about Karl? Did you say hi to Karl? And he's like, who's Karl? It was hilarious. It was a funny thing, but he was clearly playing it off. And then he had Hart just kind of being like, sort of speaking on things, but having to speak in riddles more or less, like in hypotheticals. And I guess it was kind of just entertaining seeing them all dance around that. A little disturbing to learn that OG Anunoby doesn't eat bagels. So I guess that was the thing. But yeah, other than that, I mean, it was just kind of about what you expected. Just platitudes, hope we get better, blah, blah, blah. It was nice to hear them kind of acknowledge the way that they hope to play this year, though, which I think is encouraging that, there seems to be a lot of open admission to the fact that they are really looking to play a very stretchy style of basketball this year in terms of getting a lot of threes up and finding a lot of opportunities that way.
Yeah, that's certainly exciting. Tom Thibodeau really driving home the team's defensive versatility, making note of the fact that he feels like there's a lot of just inherent flexibility having Hart, Bridges, and Anunoby on the floor all at the same time. He noted that's going to lead to them switching a lot more, which I thought was pretty interesting, because that is certainly not been his preferred style of defense in the past. He's been more drop heavy, but I think it's been encouraging in recent years that he's shown a little bit more willingness to embrace schematic versatility. And I think the fact that the Knicks personnel, I don't want to say they're more limited, because you have just two total Swiss Army knives between OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. And that's something that Thibs was, again, really trying to drive home. But you don't have the two stud defensive centers you did a year ago. You don't have Dante DiVincenzo, who's just another really good, really effective defender. You don't have Julius Randle, who's not a great defender, but is pretty well equipped to play in a switch-heavy system. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But the quote from Thibs included that OG Anunoby can guard fives, Bridges can guard ones, Harden Bridges are strong off the ball, while someone wrote Bridges, but I think they meant Anunoby is strong on the ball. We can be disruptive, is what Tom Thibodeau said. He also mentioned, Alex, that he thought they had a chance after being top 10 in both offensive and defensive rating last regular season to be better in both capacities. Offense feels pretty obvious. Defense was a little bit surprising to me that he thinks they can be better down Isaiah Hartenstein and down Mitchell Robinson for most of this season.
Yeah, I guess the confidence there, and I mean, maybe this is our first indication that despite the fact that they've now made a trade for someone who presumably will start at center to start the year and have sort of given them a more traditional outlook to the season, that maybe the small ball dream still isn't dead. So maybe we're still, there's still a world where we'll see. I mean, I guess now the lineup would kind of be Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride, Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, OG Anunoby, something like that, with no Randall in tow anymore. Maybe they're still open to that, because I could see that being the thing that sort of gives the Knicks a different defensive wrinkle. If Thibs is that confident in OG's defense to be able to hold down the five for a few minutes at a time, especially if you're not facing like an Embiid or a Jokic or whatever, like if they're facing a team that has a less stellar center that OG can just kind of feast on for a little bit and use his quickness and his ability to play the passing lanes on more so than just like brute strength and trying to get blocks and everything, then maybe that's something that he sees being an opportunity to generate an even better defensive rating. I mean, the numbers that he's citing too, of course, are the rating numbers. I do think that there's a decent chance that the Knicks defensive rating takes a hit this year, even if I think that their net rating will probably be better than last year in an ideal world. But their defensive rating, because of the fact that I think that they're going to play faster, they're going to get into their sets quicker on offense. I think there's going to be less stand around and wait and more like run a pick, get something going. Let's kick this around to these shooters. And I think there'll be a lot of guys with green lights that are ready to go off the second that they're able to. If that's the case, then by nature, sort of like back in the day, and I mean, I don't necessarily think the Knicks are going to run this fast, but it's sort of reminiscent of like the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns, where things sped up on offense and their offensive rating would be head and shoulders above everybody else. And then you would look at their defensive rating, and if you just compared it to what everybody else's defensive rating was, you would say, oh, they're giving up so many points. But it's like, yeah, the only reason is because their pace is so high that it offers the other team more opportunity to score, but they're scoring consistently 15 points more than that team. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they're giving up as long as they're scoring 15 points more than what the other team is scoring. So I kind of think maybe that's where his head is at. And, in that case, he might not at the end of the year be able to tout a top 10 offense and top 10 defense, but the Knicks might end up with I don't even think it's an exaggeration to say the Knicks, with how well they've done the past couple of years without a shooting big man, they might end up with the number one offense in the league this year. I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that world. And if they do have the number one offense, maybe they end up with like the number 15 defense or something, just in terms of pure net rating, in terms of just pure defensive rating, but their net rating actually gets better. So, it'll be sort of one of those things where you just watch it as the season goes on, and context, I think, will be pretty important in judging how much better or worse the Knicks defense gets this year.
No, and I think it's a good call, and it's also all relative to the rest of the league. But Zach Lowe at ESPN, or formerly at ESPN, because they're idiots, he's done a good job pointing this out over the last few years, that like the go-to statement was always you need a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense to win a championship. That has shifted ever so slightly towards you better have a top 5 offense and ideally you have a top 5 defense. But we saw the Denver Nuggets a couple of years ago win a championship with a defense that wasn't top 10 during the regular season. We saw the Cavs in 2017, or was it, I guess, the 2018 Cavs team, maybe both years, that made a run to the finals without having a top 10 defense, and probably not going up against an all-time opponent might have won back-to-back championships without having a top 10 defense. You can get very, very far in the NBA now with just an elite offense. And to be fair, the Boston Celtics are waiting, who have just as good of an offense and probably a top 3 defense. So at a certain point, you're going to have to play on a high level on that end of the floor. But I think this trade is all about the Knicks leaning into where the league is going and what ultimately wins championships these days. And that is the ability to get up a bunch of threes, hit them at high volume, and produce points in a playoff atmosphere where they typically go down. I also wanted to get into a conversation about who the 5th starter is going to be, because Tom Thibodeau was a little vague, a little non-committal in his answer on that. And so many more notes from this media day next on Locked On Knicks.
But first, we got to let you know about our friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And, hey, I know we're supposed to be talking about football, but how about the New York Mets, man? Francisco Lindor coming through with the big home run in the 9th inning against the Braves today. I'm feeling some type of way. I know they got to turn around and go right from Atlanta overnight to Milwaukee to play a game when you're listening to this today on Tuesday and face a team that, quite frankly, shellacked them over the weekend. But they're, screw it. Plus 116 money line. Just take it. Just take it and run. I'm buying into the Magic. Severino on the mound. I think they'll be in good shape. So I'll be betting on the Mets. If you want to use your $5 bet there, go for it. If not, do whatever it is you want to do with $5 to get $200 back in bonus bets. And that's at FanDuel.com. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through media day. And one thing that a lot of people were probably curious about, but that I'm also not surprised at all that Mr. Mysterious Tom Thibodeau decided to play close to the chest was the starting lineup. And you alluded to it before we went to break that he didn't really say who's going to end up starting. And we haven't really had this discussion yet either. So no better time than the present to open that up. I think that there's a case to be made for Josh Hart. There's a case to be made for Deuce McBride. Those are probably your 2 candidates. And it basically comes down to, do you want more defense and shooting out there with Deuce McBride? He's played well with Jalen Brunson thus far in his career. He's actually played well no matter what other point guard he's playing with. He's played really well throughout his career, whether it's Jalen Brunson, whether it's Emmanuel Quickley. They were a dynamic duo off the bench. Like he does a good job when he's out there with another ball handler, thanks to his off-ball skills. And obviously the defense speaks for itself. So, I mean, if you have a starting lineup that's Jalen Brunson, Deuce McBride, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Karl-Anthony Towns, you're now looking at a world where there's 3 elite defenders from 2 to 4 out there that can also move up to 1 to 3. They could potentially move down to 3 to 5. There's like all kinds of different ways you could sort of shift them like a little slider, like in a video game or something. You could just kind of slide them up and down there and decide where you want to put them. So from that perspective, I see the appeal there. But some of the same things could be said for Josh Hart too, in addition to the fact that Josh Hart would make it so that OG in particular, especially with the injury concerns and everything else that he'll always kind of come with, doesn't have to bang with, power forwards as much, and doesn't have to be down there absorbing all that impact with, getting rebounds and just crashing in the post and everything else. Because Josh Hart has proved time and time again that he's more than okay with that. And because of the strength that he possesses, can guard up a position, even if he gives up something in length, which he often does when he faces opposing fours. It still seems to work for him, which would allow then, Mikal and OG especially, and even Jalen Brunson to a degree, to play passing lanes more aggressively, and do the things that they do great, ball hawking on the perimeter and generating turnovers to start the break, which Josh Hart is also great at. So there's really 2 sides to the coin. I don't think there's a wrong answer necessarily. And there's a part of me that hopes that Thibs kind of throws a different starting lineup out there every single game of the preseason, including, I guess, the dark horse candidate, which would be start Precious out there with KAT, which I think is the one that maybe people aren't talking enough about. experiment with all three of those lineups plenty during the preseason. Make sure that they're all ready for anything as far as that's concerned, because they could be playing together at any point during the game, not just as starters. But I think the Knicks are in a pretty decent position right now where even short Mitchell Robinson, they have a lot of options here to potentially figure out a really solid starting lineup.
Yeah, look, there are pros and cons to each one. I think Thibs kind of gave away the answers to the test when he was talking about their defensive versatility and specifically mentioned Hart, Anunoby, and Bridges. That was kind of a ding, ding, ding moment to me. Like, all right, that's probably going to be our starting lineup. I would almost, in my mind, have Precious as a little bit more likely than Deuce, because I just think that would be kind of unbearably small for Tom Thibodeau to start Jalen Brunson and Deuce McBride next to each other, even though it offers you the benefit of having like true blue 5-out shooting and just being utterly unguardable on offense. I think there'll be times where you see that lineup. There'll certainly be times where they close games out that way. I cannot see him starting that small. Precious, I'm with you. I'm giving a little bit more credence to that than consensus, where like I don't think I've really seen that anywhere, just because we know Tibbs's predilections, right? He likes to be as big as possible. Precious Achiuwa does that for him. I don't really think Precious takes away from the switchability. If anything, he might even be a little bit more switchable than Josh Hart, given how good of a job we've seen him do on guards in the past. Obviously can guard up a little bit and just gives you an extra source of rim protection and rebounding. But I think Hart is kind of the perfect middle ground there. And I think the biggest concern for Tom Thibodeau with this group is if they can kind of maintain, and this is something I was getting into over the weekend with XJ, that core Knicks identity of just being a dominant rebounding team. And Hart is certainly, relative to his position, the best rebounder on this roster. After Karl-Anthony Towns, he's just the best rebounder, period, on this roster. Maybe Precious Achiuwa has a case, but I think he has to be out there for that reason alone. Some fascinating ways you can use him offensively. Benji Ritholtz over at Knicks Film School did a good job making the comp to Drew Holiday with the Celtics, where they take advantage of Kristaps Porzingis being out on the perimeter and slot him in the dunker spot. KAT is also, I mentioned this the other day, but a fantastic passer, and you can run a lot of the same actions you ran with Isaiah Hartenstein, with Josh Hart cutting off of that for easy layups and dunks. So I think that's a pretty clean fit. The biggest concern, and I'm curious what you think about this, is just the wing depth at this point. And what does your bench unit look like? And does that mean you sub out one of those three wings really early, like McHale, and bring them back in with the bench? How do you handle that? Because that seems like the most pressing issue for the Knicks after this trade.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they're in a good position where the guys that they picked up for the end of the roster that we thought were going to kind of be in a cage match should hopefully be able to be on this team and be good depth pieces. I think Landry Shamet, he's, I guess, nominally more of a guard, but he's kind of longer, so he can he's sort of like Dante build, you know what I mean? Like where he can be your nominal shooting guard out there. If you want to run small, you could probably throw him out there as like the nominal three, in like a 3-guard, lineup sort of deal. So I think that they're definitely going to keep him. And I think that that's going to be a huge addition for them and, help take a little bit of that sting away. That'll be like like putting a little peroxide on the wound, of losing Dante, or maybe that the stinging happens with that, but it'll cleanse the wound a little bit. You know what I mean? Make it a little easier to heal. Just getting someone out there that can shoot the three at a high clip and could hopefully soak up some bench unit minutes. Jeez, I don't know why I stumbled over that. But then also, I don't think the door is shut on Marcus Morris either. I think that they just waived him temporarily, if I had to guess, to make room for this, all the machinations of this trade, which maybe we'll just kind of housekeep on that in the final segment a little bit. But it seems like Charlotte is going to be the third team in this trade and be sort of a dumping ground for some salary. I don't know if Minnesota is going to compensate them in some way, or if that's ultimately where that protected first round pick ends up in this deal. And maybe that's sort of where that mystery goes of like, I felt like that was a little much to get this deal done, if I'm being honest, just to send to Minnesota. So maybe what ends up happening in the final deal here is that pick goes to Charlotte. But basically the Knicks are going to sign like a bunch of dudes to small but slightly greater than veterans minimum contracts using the rights that they retained for guys like Daquan Jeffries, Dwayne Washington, and I forget who else they still have available to sign in that way.
Charlie Brown Jr.
Charlie Brown. That's right. So they're going to send those three guys out to make it so that they're not receiving more salary with KAT than they're sending out, which is part of the new apron rules that they're having to like circumvent here. So I think that Morris is going to come back too, and that helps on the wing front. You know, he's, I would say, probably more of a 4 at this point in his career. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch him a ton at the end of his Clippers run, or you know what he did last year with Cleveland, or who did he start the year with? I forget, but whatever team he was with to start the year. I mean, it didn't seem like he was like, he wouldn't have switched teams halfway through the year if he was fantastic. You know what I mean? So but I think that he has enough left in the tank to hopefully give some depth minutes there, especially while you're kind of just waiting for the clock to run out for Mitch to come back. And then once Mitch comes back, I worry a little less about that, because then you won't have to be stretching your wings down to the 4 quite as much, and then that allows you to just kind of play them in more of their natural positions more often. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I fall on that. I'm not too worried about it, but it does, you know, if you're starting all 3 of your best wings, it kind of leaves you in a position where, okay, well now like Shamet and Morris kind of have to get some minutes off the bench, because if you're going to start Hart, Mikhail, and OG, that's your 3 best wing players right there, and it leaves you with very little coming off the bench. Short of, I mean, I guess the last thing we haven't really brought up in regards to this, short of Pacom Dadier coming out and just being like way better than you thought he was going to be out of training camp, and if that's the case, then, and he can actually like play minutes this year, then that changes everything. That makes all these losses not nearly as impactful if he can come in there and just kind of like make threes and play some defense.
Yeah, going to be interesting, and also going to be worth watching. Whether it's Tyler Kolek or Campaign in that backup point guard position, given that it seems Deuce is likely to be your 2 coming out of training camps with the bench unit. So we'll see how that one goes. I wanted to note real quick, just because I've seen this discussed a lot, and I've talked about it quite a bit. I know XJ got into it a little bit, but Karl-Anthony Towns as a rebounder. Defensively, I don't think there are as big concerns as I've seen from some people. He was really, really good early in his career. 88th percentile, 89th percentile, 93rd, 90th, 87th. His first 5 seasons, a little bit of a fall off since then. Last 2 years, obviously, a little bit different because he's playing Rudy Gobert, who's eating up a lot of those rebounds, or Naz Reid, who's also a very good rebounder. So defensively, you should be able to clean the glass pretty well. OG's obviously physical. If Hart's out there, he can speed in and help a lot. Offensively is where you really need Josh Hart to kind of maintain that edge that has really separated the Knicks, at least until Mitchell Robinson comes back. Plenty more to get to. Some more fun quotes, as you hinted. We'll get into the trade mechanics of how the Knicks are actually going to be able to finish this off. I thought an interesting quote from a very popular Minnesota Timberwolves beat writer on the Karl-Anthony Towns, Tom Thibodeau relationship, and so much more before we wrap up here on Locked On. All right, we are back on Locked On Knicks to wrap up this Media Day recap that you'll notice if you're really paying attention. We have not talked about Media Day all that much because, again, not too much happened. We've kind of talked around Media Day. Couple of other storylines to come out of this. Again, when there wasn't Mikal Bridges said he has no clue about his extension, but he is ready for training camp. That is pretty standard. You usually don't get negotiation details. And I think it'd be weird for the Knicks to have anything done there before this season gets rolling. 5 out, nearly everyone from Tom Thibodeau to Jalen Brunson to Hart alluded to the fact that this was playing 5 out. We know that. Missing Julius and Dante. There were just some nice quotes on the way out from Jalen Brunson. That aspect of the deal, those 2 guys leaving, was definitely tough. Julius welcomed me with open arms. That news was crazy. I'm really thankful for them. Their friendships and everything they brought to this team. Also, Josh Hart on Julius. This is a slight paraphrase. He came here when they were really struggling and helped change their trajectory, them being the Knicks. And I think the fan base is eternally grateful for that. When they come here, I hope and know that the Garden is going to show both those guys love for the sacrifices they made in a Knicks jersey. I would totally agree with Josh Hart on that. Tom Thibodeau on the acclimation process. He said the biggest challenge for this team is how quickly you can adjust and change to get everyone on the same page. You have to be careful when you have a core that's been together that you don't skip any steps. That's from new Knicks reporter James L. Edwards III. And finally, Alex, you mentioned this before. Ian Begley is convinced that the trade is still on track, even though it's not official yet. Just going to be about signing and trading the guys you mentioned to the Hornets. He also wanted to clarify that Dante DiVincenzo being included didn't have anything to do with him being upset about his role. The Knicks had been checking in on Towns all off season, and Dante DiVincenzo's inclusion was simply the breaking point. And the Knicks, maybe with the Mitchell Robinson news set in their head, finally broke and agreed to include Dante DiVincenzo in the deal.
Yeah, I never really quite bought the Dante news because, I mean, he signed on with this team last year with literally no expectation of a role, and went from 10 minutes a game to like 48 minutes a game sometimes. And, I think that both he and Hart probably were looking at this as like, I'd probably welcome playing 20 to 25 minutes a game and having a lot of guys to fall back on this team, considering what we had to go through last year. Like, I don't doubt that Josh Hart either would have been totally fine playing like 25 minutes a game, short of, if he just like wasn't touching the ball or whatever, in which case maybe we run into a situation like last year, which we talked about on his season preview the other day. But yeah, I never quite bought the whole Dante is unhappy with his role thing. That just kind of came out of left field. So I'm unsurprised to hear that it seems to be that there was no truth to that. Yeah, I think in general, I liked hearing the nice things about the former teammates. Obviously, I mean, I think Brunson actually, I mean, especially in his quote, like really talked up Julius a lot, and then, kind of just lumped Dante in there. I think that kind of goes unspoken. Obviously, that's like his old, as much as he's not on the quote roommate show with him, that was actually his old college roommate, Dante DiVincenzo, so I'm sure that stung a little bit, but good to see that he's in good spirits in that regard. I mentioned the joke about like, who's Karl? First when I saw that, I almost was like, oh no, he's not like throwing shade or something. It's like, no, he was clearly just messing around. Jalen's got a nice dry sense of humor. I like his demeanor when he busts out a joke like that. Like he's very good at just deadpanning through something, and to the point where you almost don't know if it's a joke at first or not. So that was fun. Nice quote from OG about, I always wanted to be here. This wasn't a hard decision. 200 something $million, I'm sure, had a little something to do with it too.
I always wanted to be here and make $200 million. It wasn't a hard decision.
I've always wanted to be in New York as long as my final contract number was over $200 million. So cool, but great to hear. I mean, I never really bought that he was ever entertaining any other teams either. I mean, there was the smoke about like, oh, Philly's going to try to pry him away, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, Philly knew going into free agency that they were going to get Paul George regardless. So I don't think that was ever a real threat either. So, I think that was basically the only team that would have maybe posed a threat had they not gotten George. And even then, I don't think that they would have blown the Knicks away to the point where OG would be like, yeah, this team that I came to and turned into a juggernaut for a month that could potentially win a championship, which I'm sure he's probably pretty eager to do, considering, the fact that he technically has a ring, but wasn't actually really part of the playoff run of the Raptors championship. I'm sure that probably sticks with him a little bit, and he wants to be an active part of a championship team. So glad to hear that he's stoked for the new year. I thought Mikal Bridges had an interesting quote about, if you want to be a really good team, great team, everyone has to sacrifice. If you want to be one of the best teams, everyone has to be dialed in. Good to hear that he's already on board. Also sort of a light acknowledgement of the fact that he's probably going to take a significant step back as far as what his offensive role is on this team versus what it was on the Nets the last couple of years, which good. I think that if that allows him to focus more on just being a demon on defense and then being, a 1A light type scorer when you need him to be, I think that's awesome, because we've seen Jalen Brunson is not completely infallible. Like, there are going to be some nights where he's off. There will be some nights where KAT's off. And on those nights, hopefully you'll be able to rely on Mikal Bridges to be that guy, but he seems totally fine with not being that guy in the other times. So that's great to hear as well. All in all, just, I don't know, like I said, boring day, but like a feel good day, I guess, overall. It seemed like everybody was pretty happy to be there. And, it's nice to have a team that's just kind of talking about like, yeah, we just want to repeat the awesome stuff that we did last year and not just feeding spoonful after spoonful of hope into the fan base during media day of like, this year will be different, I promise. And then for us to just be disappointed the first month into the season. This one feels good. It feels like a team that knows what their mission is and is ready to go achieving it, hopefully.
Yeah, I saw a quote from Jakob Pertl at Raptors Media Day, and he said something like, well, everyone knows we're not gunning for a championship this year. And I was like, yeah, that was the Knicks guys weren't saying that our first few years doing this podcast, but they might as well have been. And it's nice to have a team that no one feels the need to say that before the season even starts. There are also a lot of pictures of just different guys on the Bulls looking really sad. Nothing like that. I will say the two final things before we get out. I thought maybe not significant because like Jalen Brunson is never going to air out if he has a big issue with something. I do think it was notable that he said when someone asked him like about the deal, he said, and like if he knew about it ahead of time, he said, I don't deal with anything front office wise. And even more so than that quote, just that like he seemed kind of at peace with it. And I think he recognizes how much easier Karl-Anthony Towns is going to make his life. I mean, when there's a world where Jalen Brunson's saying, hey, I took $100 billion plus discount to play with my friends, and you just shipped off one of my groomsmen immediately after I signed that contract, and you did me kind of dirty. And I would assume, like, I don't think Leon Rose ever guaranteed Jalen Brunson, like, don't worry, these guys are going to be here for the life of your deal. But I'm sure he said we're going to try to keep them at all costs. So the fact that maybe his closest friend of the group, even though Josh Hart's the one he does the podcast with, is already gone, I think it's a good sign that Brunson seems to be focused on the big picture. The only other thing I wanted to get in before we get out is John Krasinski, not the one on The Office, the Timberwolves, a fantastic athletic reporter, went on Fred Katz's podcast and had this to say as a guy who covered KAT and Thibs' entire run together in Minnesota. He said KAT, Thibs, their personalities conflict. By the time Thibs was fired, they weren't speaking, but and this quote is cut up a little bit, so I apologize for butchering it all. But new appreciation. Carl's matured, probably understands Tom Thibodeau a little bit more. Tom Thibodeau is more comfortable in New York than he was in Minnesota. On both of them to understand that they need each other to win a championship. So it's just an interesting bit of insight for a relationship that we've heard for years was very rocky during its first go around.
Yeah, I mean that's the biggest. To me, that's the biggest question mark, and that would have been the thing I would have wanted to see at this media day is just see those two interacting together. Just like, please, let's see a couple smiles. Let's see some pats on the back, some good natured ribbing, that kind of thing. Because I'm really curious to see how it's going to work out with those two. Apparently, I did go back and look because I said, after the trade, like, yeah, that's one of the biggest questions because, everybody sort of low key, like Zach LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, they all sort of low key under their breath sort of pointed to like, well, we didn't have any problem with Thibs, probably that guy over there. And, maybe it's been over reported to this point or whatever. I did go back and look and like KAT did immediately after Thibs got fired, like to the media, he put on a good face and did say like, I respect everything that he taught me and blah, blah, blah. Of course, all the reports came out afterwards that he was unhappy with Thibs and was part of the reason that, Thibs got axed there. But then there's also been stuff since then of them saying like, we've buried the hatchet, whatever, the past is the past. It doesn't matter. So I kind of just need to see that be the truth. And, I hope that with the way that Thibs has, I was talking about this with Ben Beacon, on yesterday's show, which if anyone didn't listen, that was a really long, but I think a really good conversation. Like Ben spoke extremely highly of KAT in that regard, and especially of his defense. I think, he was saying to me like that the thing that sort of unlocked KAT and made him a better defender was that they stopped playing him and drop as much, started having him shade out more to the perimeter, blitz a little bit on pick and rolls and stuff like that. And I don't know that Thibs is necessarily going to be like blitz, 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 but he has, in the last year and change, started having his big show out more to the perimeter because he finally kind of realized like, yeah, even if Mitchell Robinson is a genetic freak and can jump really high and sometimes go from nearly the free throw line to blocking a three-pointer, that's not going to happen all that often, especially as the years go on. And he started having Mitch and Hartenstein shade out more to the perimeter, show more to the three-point shooter. so that you didn't run into like Dame Lillard or Steph Curry just bombing 25 threes on the Knicks any given night. And, I think that will help KAT some, and hopefully will help his standing with Thibs, because I imagine that nobody's ever going to say a word about KAT's offense because it's great. But the defense at its worst could be the thing that draws a wedge there. So good to see that they seem on good terms, and that the reporting is, and like John Krasinski of The Athletic seems very plugged in. He shows up on my timeline all the time with regards to Timberwolves stuff. So I'm inclined to believe anything that he would write about that. Hopefully that is all the case and things are all good there. Because if that's the case, then I think the Knicks are in really good shape going into this training camp. Of course, once they get the deal done. So that's just got to happen. Then we'll be good.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, well, we'll wrap this one up on Media Day. Plenty more to come. DJ Zulo on OG Anunoby later this week. I'm sure we'll do an episode saying goodbye formally to Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, because they deserve that. And then we've been promising it all offseason. Maybe the Knicks spot has changed a little bit. We were doing a futures draft where we pick the brightest futures of any team in the league. I think this could be the first time the Knicks go top 5. I'm pretty sure it will be the first time the Knicks go top 5. But anyways, all that and more to come this week on Locked On Knicks.